Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Adam Betchwell. I'm the Conservation Director for Georgia Audubon, and I'm very excited for tonight's talk. It's one that I've been giving for years, and I've been so happy to have Lauren as my partner in crime on this topic, and she's going to do a great job giving you an overview of our project Safe Flight. But before that, we do have a few announcements that I need to share with you. Lauren, if you go ahead and go to the next slide. If you all are not aware, September, years ago, we got the governor to sign a proclamation stating that September is Georgia Grows Natives for Birds Month. So it's a great time for us to highlight all the ways that we are trying to help our birds by getting more native plants in the ground, whether that be at your house or your workplace or at more wild spaces across the state. And so one event that we really wanted to highlight in case it might interest you is our Georgia Grows Native for Birds Round Robin. This is going to be an event held on September 9th from 9 to 2. Registration is open now. You can see the web address there. This is going to be our new office, so it's a great place to come see our shiny new digs, the Trees Atlanta Cadena building, hear from some Georgia Audubon staff and other partners. There's going to be tables from different other nonprofits, folks who care about wildlife and birds, a whole bunch going on to learn about how you can help our birds by planting the right echinacea or the right native holly and how you can target that privet that might be coming around your backyard. So I encourage you to check that out and consider joining us on the 9th. Go ahead, Lauren. And that is just one of many, many, many things that we have ongoing during September, just that's native plant related. So you can see a bunch here. We have webinars about insects and their importance to birds. As we know, over 90% of our songbirds utilize insects at least sometime during the year, including bluebirds, which feed a lot to their young. We have the Round Robin, which I mentioned, partners with Georgia Native Plant Society, Trees Atlanta, Georgia Forestry Foundation, some local nurseries as well. Other webinars on how to make your backyard better for birds, plant identification, gardening for birds. So a whole lot going on. Again, please check out our website or scan that QR code down there. And of course, check out our local field trips and everything else that we have going on during the month of September. And so with that, I am going to pass over to Lauren. I will be kind of manning the Q&A, so please feel free to throw something in there. I can either answer it in real time via chat, or we might save some of those for Lauren. So if you have any questions about the subject material or about bird building collisions or about how to get involved with our monitoring program, please feel free to either throw those down there or save them to the end. So again, thank you so much. And Lauren, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Okay, so I will get right into it. So just to introduce myself again, I'm Bowman Clontz. I'm the Coastal Conservation Coordinator with Georgia Audubon, and I am the Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant State Fellow for 2022-2023. I am also going to turn off my video during the presentation. I was having some connection issues earlier. I just want to make sure that the connection stays stable throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn off my video so that I can continue with the presentation. Okay. All right. So just to start, who is Georgia Audubon? So we are part of the National Audubon Society Network. However, we are a separate entity with our own due-paying members, our own payroll staff. We do partner with local volunteer chapters across the state. And our organizational mission statement is building places where birds and people thrive. Okay, so why do birds matter? Birds are essential parts of the natural ecosystem. They keep systems in balance, they pollinate plants, they disperse seeds, and they are key indicators of environmental change. Rapid bird decline can alert us to environmental problems that need our attention. The issue is that birds are rapidly declining. We've lost nearly 3 billion birds since the 70s. Okay, and I would usually have some audience participation here where I would ask you, what do you think are the top 3 biggest killers of birds? But I'm just going to go through these because I can't see anybody anyway. So number 3 would be buildings and glass collisions. Then it would be outdoor cats, and then habitat loss would be number 1. It's thought to pose the greatest threat by far to birds, both directly and indirectly, but its overall impact is really difficult to directly assess. Okay, so just to give an overview of some of our conservation programs that we work on at Georgia Audubon. So to start off, we develop habitat restoration sites, including a maritime grassland habitat on Jekyll Island of about 3.5 acres in partnership with the Jekyll Island Authority and other partners, where we've removed invasive turf grass and replaced it with native muley grass. We also have our project Safe Flight, which I'm going to go into more depth on throughout this presentation. And another initiative that we've been working on for the first time this past year was expanding nightjar monitoring across the state of Georgia, in part with the Nightjar Survey Network. So nightjars are whippoorwills or Chuckles widow or nighthawks. And we are recruiting volunteers to conduct roadside surveys where they listen for those species and record what they hear. And this will ultimately help researchers gain a better understanding of population estimates and habitat preferences, amongst other things. And then we have our Lights Out program, which is an advocacy campaign to reduce lighting, primarily during spring and fall migration, to lessen our impact on birds, which I will also go into more depth on. So if you do sign up to be a Lights Out participant, you'll be helping to reduce the impact that lights can have on migrating birds, because too much bright light in the night sky can disorient and confuse birds during migration. These pictures that you see are of the Chicago skyline, and Chicago had a really aggressive Lights Out campaign that was really successful, and you can see the significant difference that they were able to make. Okay, so if you sign up as a Lights Out participant, this is an example of an alert that you'll get if you take the pledge, and then you'll get these alerts that will tell you it's either a low, a medium, or a high alert night. So if it's not possible for you to turn off your lights every single night, which is most preferable, then you could prioritize turning them off on high alert nights when you know there's going to be a lot of birds flying over your area. And lights don't just result in window collisions. So it can disrupt the bird's circadian rhythm, where they're singing later at night or earlier in the morning. It could have seasonal impacts where they're entering a reproductive state earlier. So some of the things that we can do to reduce lighting at home is to use smarter lighting, so downshielded lights, or using motion sensors or timers, but ideally just turning them off. So a few tips on lighting: less lumens are better, and blue rich white light is not preferable. So the warmer the lighting, the better. Okay, so why are birds flying into windows? I really like this graphic just to illustrate how many birds are coming through during fall migration and spring migration in our area. I think this is a really great visual. Okay, so I think this slide was a little, might have gotten out of order here, but that's okay. So nocturnal flight calls. So when birds are passing over an area that has been illuminated by lights, there are a higher amount of nocturnal flight calls. It could be that they're becoming more confused, they're attracted to the lights. It could be that it's important social cues for decision-making during migration. But there are species that give nocturnal flight calls that are more likely to collide with buildings. And this is just a list of some of the most common species that are colliding with buildings, with ruby-throated hummingbirds being number 1. Okay, so birds see the world differently than we do, and this largely impacts why they're flying into windows. The positioning of their eyes affects their depth perception. They have very little depth perception straight ahead. They see light differently, and they have poor contrast sensitivity. And they don't see the glass as a barrier. So you can see in this picture that the vegetation in those bottom windows is being reflected pretty visibly, and the birds just see that as an extension of their habitat, and they just fly directly into it. So this is just another example of this reflection in the window that just looks like an extension of the habitat, and oftentimes birds will just fly into the window at high speeds, and it's often fatal. And so we can tell that this is a window because we can see the structure of it. But, you know, if I zoomed in a little bit more, then you might not be able to tell that that's a picture of a window and not just a picture of the tree. And this is another type of structure that's really problematic because it's got glass on either side and there's vegetation on either side. So oftentimes birds will fly into them thinking they can fly right through them, trying to get to the habitat on the other side. And this is problematic for obvious reasons. Okay, and so just kind of further make my point, we don't see glass very well either, and I'm sure that most of us have a funny or embarrassing story about running into a glass door or something, or we've probably witnessed other people doing it. So we don't see glass very well either. But yeah, so lights at night can attract and disorient birds, and this often results in collisions as well. But the more glass equals more collisions. But we have learned some visual cues to help us not run into glass doors and windows. But the birds obviously can't identify the same structures that we can. So you can see here on this picture on the right side that there are actually like dots that are eye lines. So those probably just to help people not run into those. But we can also see the structure on either side and recognize it as a door. But obviously this is going to be problematic for birds. And so a question that I've actually been asked a lot since I started on this project is, does the orientation of the windows have any impact on collisions? And that has actually not been shown to affect collision rate. The orientation to the landscape matters more. So what type of vegetation is around the windows is more impactful than whether it's north or south. And low windows are typically worse because that's typically what's reflecting vegetation. Another issue is that sometimes birds will see their reflection in the window and attack their own reflection, thinking that it's another male encroaching on their territory. And this can also result in injury. But yeah, so this shows us here that private residences actually have higher rates of collisions than high rises, which I think people often find surprising. But low rises and private residences actually are bigger issues for bird collisions. So just to recap, I know I threw a lot of information at you all, but just to recap all of that, the main things that really impact bird collisions are the amount of glass, the adjacent habitat, the seasonality, the time of day, the avian density, and the guild, so foliage gleaners versus omnivores and ground foragers. Okay, so now that I've told you what the issue is, what does a bird-friendly home even look like? So there are some things that we can do, some strategies that we can incorporate during construction if you're looking at building a new home, such as minimizing the use of glass, reducing the exposure of the glass. You could incorporate more signals on the glass, or you could even install a bird-safe glass, such as this. I've included a picture. There's an option for a UV pattern glass. So the birds are able to see this, but it's not visible to us. But it just kind of looks like this etching in the window, and it lets the birds know that there is something there so that they don't fly into it. But often this type of design will actually be more energy efficient, and so it's mutually beneficial. And so these are just some examples of window treatments. So if you're not looking at building a new home, or you're not constructing anything, but you have some existing windows that are a problem, these are some examples of what you can do to existing windows. And there are a lot of different options. You could put these like sticker decals of different things, different images. A really popular option are these white dots in a grid system. There are several companies that we will partner with, Kaleidoscape and Feather Friendly, who sell these types of products, but there are a ton of options out there. There are also a lot of DIY options. The main thing that stops collisions is these patterns that become visual barriers for the birds. So a lot of these birds are really small. They're really good at maneuvering through tight spaces, and they have a very cute sense of their shape and size and what where they're going to be able to fit into. So the general rule of thumb is to have break up the reflection of the window 2 inches apart, or 2 by 4 inches apart. And contrast is key. So the higher the contrast of whatever you're using, the better. So you can see on the right picture here that there are several different types of tape. A variety of these will work, but again, the higher the contrast, the better. Screens also work really well. Just putting the screen on the outside of the window is also a really great solution. So these Acopian bird saver or Zen curtains are essentially just paracord that you can string up in your window. And these are another great option just to break up the reflection of the glass. You can go through this company, or you can even have your own DIY option where you could just go buy paracord and just make sure that you're spacing them apart about 2 inches. And so this is a video just to show kind of how easy it would be if you went with this option with the white sticker option. The application is really easy. And this is actually a nature center that we partnered with, where we were helping them to retrofit these windows. But I think that this design is really sleek and really nice, and it looks very modern, and it doesn't obstruct the view at all. Excuse me. So this is another nature center that we worked with to retrofit these windows. So you can see on the outside, they've got these really beautiful images. And this picture in the middle is the inside looking out, and it's not fully installed yet. I don't think that so this would be the owl. I don't think that the top part has been installed yet, but you can see on the bottom where the stewardship it would be, that you can see through it and it's not obstructing the view. And so this is just another example. This is at Camp Jekyll. So this is a 4-H center on Jekyll Island, and they also went with these white dots in this grid system. And this is just another example of how easy this application could be, but it ended up looking really nice. And there is a little sticker with a QR code on the front so that people can learn more about it. Excuse me. Okay, so these are just a few more options. Some of them are DIY. So you can see like in the top left, I think this is like just temporary window paint. If you just wanted to prioritize doing something during spring or fall migration, you could just put up temporary paint during that time when it's most critical, but also just putting your screens on the outside of your windows, putting blinds on the outside. Again, there are a lot of options. Okay, so this is a portion of the presentation where I do want to encourage people to ask questions, and like if you have any concerns or you've already been volunteering, please feel free to jump in. I want to provide space for everybody to talk through these details and ask any questions if you're interested in volunteering for Project Safe Flight. So I guess I should also start with, for those of you who might not know, what is Project Safe Flight? So we will be monitoring different areas of coastal Georgia and metro Atlanta, where we rely on volunteers to patrol buildings and walk around looking for incidents of bird collisions. And oftentimes we will find birds that are deceased because they have flown into a window. And so we will record this incident, and then we will log it in an app that you can download to your phone. And oftentimes we'll collect the bird as well and store it somewhere and then send it off for research afterwards. But this helps us determine the extent of the problem locally and helps us identify areas of concern. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of a dry throat. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, so we conduct monitoring during peak migratory periods. So we have volunteers going out and walking these routes in the spring from around March 15th to May 31st, and August 15th, in the fall, August 15th through mid-November about. And so we have these walking routes that we've identified beforehand. And I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the coast because that's where I've been working on this project. But if you are in Atlanta and you have any questions, please feel free to throw it in the chat or ask me directly. So in Brunswick, we have a route downtown and also on CCGA's campus. In Savannah, because it's a very different city than Atlanta and Brunswick, we bounce around a little bit more to individual buildings because there's not really a cohesive route that we could do in Savannah. There's not as many sky rises. It's just a different city to walk. So we're still kind of developing our routes there, but a lot of it is just bouncing around to different buildings and looking at specific buildings that we think are problematic. So what our volunteers do when they sign on to be our Project Safe Flight volunteer, we'll have you join our Google Calendar and download the app on your phone. The Google Calendar will help us not have any overlap in who's walking which route on which day and at what time, so that you can just very quickly just plug in, okay, I'm going to be there on Monday at 8 a.m., for example. And so we will provide any supplies that you need. Oftentimes, all you're going to need is gloves if you don't want to pick up the bird with your bare hands. You can also just pick them up with a Ziploc bag, turned inside out. So we'll provide Ziploc bags, we'll provide pencil and field identification cards that just have like a little bit of information about where you found the bird, what species it is. And that's for anybody who is collecting birds and going to transport them to our storage facility. And we have a local place for you to go if you're in Savannah or Brunswick or Atlanta. And then after you walk your route, we have a spreadsheet that volunteers can log that information into a shared effort log. And this just helps us keep track of how often people have gone out. So it's very basic information, just like how long did it take you to walk the route, your name, what route that you walked, what time, etc. And so, yeah, again, these are just the supplies that you'll need when you're walking on the route. A tote or a backpack is probably smart to carry all of these supplies. Ziploc, paper bag, binder clips, gloves, pencils, data cards. We also will provide a permit that just basically says that we have permission to collect these birds. You don't really have to have those, but if you're worried that somebody might stop you and ask you what you're doing, you can show it to them just so that they know, hey, I'm with Georgia Audubon. And, you know, we have permission to be taking them, the birds, and this is what we're doing. I don't think that we've ever had any issues with people being upset that people are walking around looking for birds, but sometimes it makes people feel better just to have that on them. And I wanted to mention too, the brown paper bags. So 2 of the places that we have volunteers can drop off birds. One of them is the Marine Extension Center on Skidaway Island. And that is also an aquarium. So we just want to be really mindful that we're potentially just where we're bringing the birds. We don't want to alarm anybody. It's obviously not related to the aquarium at all, but we just don't want there to be any cause for concern. So they just asked us to be really discreet and to just put the birds in a brown paper bag. Okay, so the time that you should be walking the route, really any time and day that your schedule permits. We're really flexible. We really just need help. So we are willing to accept, you know, whatever time you're able to fit into your schedule. Preferably, it would be before sunrise. I know that can be hard for people. So again, if that's not something you're able to do, but you can go later in the day, that's perfectly fine. Okay, and so kind of getting more into the nitty-gritty. So the Field Maps app that you can download to your phone is really easy. It's really intuitive. We have a shared login that will show you the map that you can follow while you're walking your route. This is the username. You can just email me for the password. I didn't want to put that on here since we're going to be putting this presentation online later, but just email me for the password if you need it. And it is free to download the app in whether you have an Apple phone or an Android. Okay, and so this is our Brunswick route for anybody in Brunswick. This is downtown, starting at the library. Some of the focal buildings that we're looking at is the public library. There's parking right outside of there that you can park at while you're doing the route. And then, yeah, just walking up and down on either side of the street, looking at the shop windows. We're looking at the post office as well. We really didn't find a whole lot this past spring, but who knows, we might be finding more birds this fall. So we also have, and I recognize this is a very poorly drawn route on here, but this is the College of Coastal Georgia. So if we do have any students from CCGA tonight. This is the route that you would be walking, which you don't have to be a student either. If you live in Brunswick and you're able to walk the campus route, these are the buildings that we're going to be focusing on. And just let me know if you are planning on doing that route, because I have a contact on campus who is also walking routes with students, and we can all link up and organize efforts a little. So we have our Field Maps app, but let's say that you're for some reason not able to download an app to your phone. You could also log window collision incidents in dBird. So it's dbird.org. And this is just a screenshot of what you would see. But basically, it doesn't have to be just during migration periods. But if you see an incident of a bird having flown into a window and died, you can log this incident in dBird. These are the type of questions that it will ask you: bird species, sex, age, details like the time and cause of death and everything. And so this also helps, and it contributes to research as well. Okay, so switching gears, I'm just going to provide a brief overview again of a lot of the things that we just went over. If anybody has any specific questions about any of the specific volunteer logistics, there will be space at the end to ask those questions. But so yeah, just to provide an overview of everything that we went over, the biggest threats to birds is habitat loss, outdoor cats, and window glass collisions, primarily during migration. But a lot of people don't know about these issues, so spreading the word and joining our volunteer efforts is really helpful. And this isn't just an urban threat. Private residences have high rates of collisions too, and you can help. So please sign up for our Lights Out Georgia pledge. You can, so when you sign up, you'll get alerts and more information about that campaign. But also make your home and the lights in your home bird friendly, report incidental findings to dBird, or become a Project Safe Flight volunteer. Okay, and so I am actually going to stop screen sharing, turn my video back on so you guys can see me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. There were a few questions. I got to all of them but one during the chat. I'll go over them again just in case some of you were not monitoring the discussion there. From the beginning, someone's asking about how effective Lights Out programs are. You know, they showed, or Lauren showed, the Chicago skyline, but has there been any actually hard research to show how effective they are? And the answer to that, which I put in there, is that it has been shown to be incredibly effective at a specific building. That's kind of been the extent of a scientific approach so far. So McCormick's Place in Chicago is famous, unfortunately, for killing lots of birds. It's right on Lake Michigan. So a lot of birds heading south in the fall have historically collided with that space. But after reducing the lightings, they've shown, I think, like an 85 or 90% decrease in the birds have died at that space. I can't think of, Kyle Horton is one of the authors of that paper, but I can't think of the title of it. So at a singular building, it has been shown to be incredibly effective. The more challenging thing is, how do you get 100 buildings to do it, or 1,000 that are all touching each other and light trespassing from other buildings? That has not been shown yet. And another part of the issue is we don't have monitoring programs like this in a lot of big cities. So you need Lights Out participants, enough of them to make a noticeable difference, and then monitoring to corroborate that info. So it's still being developed, but we do know it does help. The next question was about legislation. New York City is working now on a lighting ordinance or lighting legislation. They've already passed bird safe building standards, and so have other cities. Portland, many cities in California, Toronto, Baltimore, Chicago's got something pending. And the question was, are we going to do anything about that? And the answer is absolutely. For years, I've been saying it's our long-term project, but it's actually now starting to happen. So we are actively having those conversations to at least start the process. I anticipate it might be a long and challenging one. There are no bird-friendly building or lighting ordinances in the Southeast that I'm aware of. So we would be the first to kind of tackle this. And then another question was, why early? Why are we getting out there before sunrise? And I kind of mentioned it's not perfect because it depends a lot on the cleaning crews. If we go out too early or too late in the morning, even though it's still early, the birds that hit throughout the night, we're going to be discarded by facilities or maintenance. If we go too early, we're not going to have any volunteers because we're asking you to get up way too early. And we then miss the birds in kind of the peak movement of that mid-morning time when our songbirds are bouncing around. So we normally on the Atlanta routes kind of get started around a half an hour before sunrise to try to straddle that perfect window. But it really varies quite a lot depending on the building or the route that we monitor because of the cleaning schedules. Mike asked about lights out signage so people can display their participation. What we have right now are window clings. I might even have some, or if I could turn my laptop, I could show you my window right here because we are, of course, proud participants in Lights Out Georgia. So yes, it's a great idea. We have small clings for homeowners. We do have larger clings for commercial properties. Those were funded by a grant a couple of years ago. So yeah, we're always looking for other ways to kind of share the program and share the initiative because for a lot of this, education is the main thing. People just don't know this is happening. Birds don't know that information that birds are even flying at night, and that millions of birds could be passing overhead. And then Elaine, longtime supporter of this program, said just that she wants some more information on the Atlanta programs. And I am your contact for all things Atlanta. So I will put my email in the chat momentarily. Feel free to follow up with me when we send out a recording of this. I can try to put some other helpful links to give you. I think the biggest hurdles, or I guess the process is if you express to me that you're interested, or to Lauren or to both of us, I will send you a whole bunch of help documents that we have created on how to use the Field Maps app that Lauren outlined, on how to use our Google Calendar. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, please jot those down. Either of us, for any of you, but for Atlanta, I am definitely the go-to. I'm here, Lauren's down in Brunswick, but I can walk you through that process. We can get you the logins you need. We can show you how to use the app. The app is really not that complicated once you get used to it. If the app is a barrier, as Lauren mentioned, we have dBird. That's a little bit easier. We can consider that option. We have bird collection areas and freezers in both Atlanta and on the coast. If you're unable or unwilling to pick up birds, that's okay. You can still participate. We can work around that. But yes, we are here to help with all the technology and any of the specifics. And if you just reach out, I will get you set up. And normally what I try to do is myself join new volunteers or returning volunteers on a route, or pair you with one of our more experienced volunteers who already know the routes well, and they can have you shadow them. And then when you're comfortable, you can either do it alone or recruit some friends to go with you, or join those existing volunteers. If you have any more comments or questions, please throw them in the chat. I'm trying to think if there's anything that Lauren didn't touch on, but I think she did a great job. As she mentioned, this is a major source of mortality for birds in the US, and something that is completely or almost completely preventable. We need things like the products to become more readily available, which they are, the prices to come down, which they have, the education and the engagement, I think, is a big thing. Because again, people just do not know that on the low end, 1 million birds a day are dying from running into our structures. Luckily, that's not how the mortality is distributed. It's definitely a spring and fall migration issue. And we're giving this talk now because fall migration is just starting to ramp up. So it's a good time to get familiar with the program and to learn all the ins and outs. Karen just asked, it looks like Lauren's typing, but I'll go ahead and answer as well. What do we do when we find an injured bird? We have partnered, especially up in Atlanta. It's been a trickier issue on the coast, to the best of my knowledge. We try to partner with local rehabbers. So in Atlanta, our go-to has been Wild Nest, which is in the Decatur area. We've also taken birds to Aware, Chattahoochee Nature Center if we happen to find a raptor, but they don't take songbirds. So there are a few places that we try to transport them. And so the best way around that, or the best way to handle that, is we have brown paper bags. We have a help document to show you how to go about picking up those birds. Sadly, most of the birds that are injured but not dead are pretty heavily concussed and just kind of sitting there, and normally pretty easy to grab. So we grab the birds gently, put them in the bag, keep it closed, and then I encourage the volunteers to either get in touch with me right away via text or email, or to reach out to one of those rehabbers. Ideally, every bird would go to a rehabilitation center because almost all the injuries are internal and it's hard to tell how the bird's doing. But the reality of Atlanta is that you could be an hour away from those rehabbers, or you have life that you need to go take care of. So we will try to find transportation. In the worst case scenario, if the bird cannot be taken to a rehab station or situation, we normally just encourage you to take it to a place away from buildings like a park and let it go. But almost always we are able to find an Uber for the birds to get it to where it can receive some help and hopefully continue on its migratory journey. But again, we have information walking you through that entire process, which we are more than happy to send your way. And then Marcia asked about a list of products and sources. I assume you're referring to for retrofitting. Lauren mentioned two, and I can throw them in the chat here. One is Feather Friendly. They are definitely one of the leaders. I think it's just featherfriendly.com. And I put the link right in the chat there. Yes, featherfriendly.com. Feather Friendly is fantastic. They're one of the leaders. They're a Canadian company. They partner with 3M for the actual production of their film material. It's small white dots. Feather Friendly does small white dots amazingly well. That's all they do, but they do it great. They have a recognition program. They have homeowner kits, which I actually have one right here, which you might be able to see if you don't get too much glare. So it's pretty simple. It's just small little strips. They walk through the whole process, and it's very affordable for a few windows. The biggest challenge for addressing your windows is everything that has shown to be effective to date needs to be on the outside of the glass. So depending on your home, that can be a bit of a challenge. But that's the main thing. And then Kaleidoscape is another one, which I just threw into the chat as well. And I believe these are on our website. It's actually kaleidoscape.org. So excuse my typo there. The only thing I will say about Kaleidoscape is they have a clear product that I don't feel comfortable recommending at this time. There hasn't been any real research to show how effective it is. And birds don't pick up contrast as well as we do. And so the clear product, I fear, it's probably better than nothing, but probably not good enough for you to waste your resources and time on it. So yes, so my first recommendation would be Feather Friendly or Kaleidoscape, depending on what you're looking for. The American Bird Conservancy, it's abcbirds.org. They are the leaders on all things collisions, in my opinion. And they, about a year ago, came out with an amazing database that ranks every sort of product or external facade of a building on how effective it is at reducing collisions. And so it has a whole list of Feather Friendly and Kaleidoscape and other companies like Solix is one. Acopian Bird Savers is the paracord material that Lauren showed earlier. So that's like a dangling Zen curtain rather than something adhering to your glass. But even insect screens or external shutters, there are UV products you can do, which I'm blanking on the name. The only problem with the UV is the UV effectiveness will wear out over time. So it's not as long lasting as these other ones I've mentioned. And if you abide by the proper spacing, which is just 2 by 2 inch spacing parameters, the UV decals can become quite expensive. So I would recommend feather-friendly kaleidoscape, copian, solix, or checking out the database. But there are many options, and I am happy to answer specific questions if you want to reach out at my email. Diana's throwing one here. I think you all can see that, called Bird Friend. Diana and I chatted about this. I think it's like a Feather Friend similar product. So there are a lot out there, and some are sleek and simple, and some are a bit more flashy. I always say, if you have children or grandchildren or a neighbor who wants to come over, maybe you have one window where you've noticed collisions. Let them paint it with some washable paint for September and October, or for the second half of April. Temporary solution until you think about it, but that could save a few birds that might have collided with your building. So there are lots of options. They can be very sleek, they can be very minimal, they don't have to be ugly, which I think a lot of people fear when they think about putting things on their windows, or that they're not going to be able to see out. And luckily, that's just not the case anymore. Any other questions? Like I said, and like Lauren mentioned, our fall monitoring season is just now starting. It's still early. We start this early because some species move through early, like the Louisiana water thrush, cerulean warbler. Those are some of the first migrants to kind of pass through most of Georgia, especially in the Piedmont up by Atlanta. But within a couple of weeks, we're going to be seeing big numbers of redstarts and chestnut-sided warblers. And later in the fall, we get Tennessee warblers and blue-headed vireos. So we definitely need the help. We're taking this information to educate on, educate and outreach. So going to legislators and decision makers to say, hey, here's the scale of the problem in Atlanta. Here's why we know we need to do something. The species diversity, the number of birds. We are about to launch or unveil some really cool new mapping tools that we have developed with our partner out at Colorado State, who's actually quantifying migration using NextRad radar technology and actually determining where these birds are likely stopping in Georgia. So we'll have a hotspot map and know some of the predictors, and then taking that information to educate and leverage our conservation work and our community engagement work. So lots of cool stuff. And we're really excited that you all at least are interested in learning more about the threat, and especially those of you who might be interested in getting your steps and getting out and helping birds. It's a unique volunteer program that admittedly is not for everyone. It's not great to see hurt birds or dead birds, but we are working very hard to make a change, and we are doing so off the back of many committed volunteers, which is great. And it's a good way to learn about the birds, see them up close, and to understand their migration. So it's challenging, but for me, it's rewarding. Any other questions? Lauren, anything else to add that you thought of? I don't want to get started. I can just start talking about this forever, and I don't want to duplicate your presentation.
No, I don't think so. I think, well, one thing that I wanted to add, so I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that I am the Sea Grant Fellow. My fellowship is wrapping up in a month and a half or so. So at that point, somebody will be taking my place. But so hopefully there'll be somebody that I can direct you to at that point if somebody has reached out to me about volunteering. Otherwise, you can reach out to Adam.
Yes, good point. We are sad to be losing Lauren, but hoping to find someone who's as skilled and passionate about the migration issue. Paul asked a good question about this mapping technology that we're developing. Will it suggest which buildings are likely danger spots, and potentially using that to coach where to go look for birds? Probably not. It probably won't be that granular. It'll be more where birds are stopping and what are some of the variables and what areas. So for example, some of the predictors will be forest cover or intact salt marsh or percent native grassland or things like that. Things that are probably obvious why birds are stopping in those places. But some of the other variables are going to be development and light pollution. So we might see like, hey, Albany is getting a higher number of migratory birds than one would expect, and it's due to light pollution or things like that. So it'll be more on a grand scale. From a specific individual building thing, there are a few things that are kind of basic in guessing if they are going to be problematic. One is, and I think Lauren mentioned this, is in general, the more glass, the more likely there are going to be collisions there. So just amount of glass. So I happen to know Paul is up in the suburbs north of Atlanta, and around Atlanta, we just love reflective glass boxes. These little business parks that are 4 stories tall and just mirrors. And those are almost always horrendous because they're so reflective. They're far enough out from the city that we still have a lot of the vegetation that attracts the birds. And they're just so reflective. So amount of glass, the glazing on the glass, like how reflective it is. And then what is being reflected. If we're down in Midtown and you have a really glassy front, but it's just reflecting the building across from it, it's going to be less dangerous than a building that's reflecting an acre of greenery. So those are some good predictors. Of course, the lighting could be part of it, but that's very complex and hard to measure at times. So the short answer is not yet, Paul. We don't have it that granular, but we're getting closer. We're getting closer. I think the grid squares on these maps are going to be maybe a kilometer by kilometer, which is much, much finer scale than like eBird, for example, if you all are bird watchers and you know that. So it's getting better, but it's not quite there yet. And then Diana asked, do we have any data to share on current collision numbers for the migration through Atlanta or the coast? So the coast, we did our first trial run this past spring, and we only found a few birds. So the coast is still very much to be determined on the scale and what species. We have a current grant through the Disney Conservation Fund, which is paying for our work this year and next year. So that's covering some of my time and Lauren's time. It's covering the materials that we give to you all. It's covering the mapping technology that we're working with our partners. And it's also covering film to retrofit some existing problematic buildings. So the coast is very new. We just started, which is part of the reason why this was coastal focus, is because we would love to get other folks. The Atlanta project has been going on now since more or less I started, which is almost 8 years ago. Right when I started, some volunteers had done a little bit of scouting before I arrived. And then I did a little bit of work by myself, and then we kicked it off in 2016, I think. 2016 is the first season. In the 7.5 years or so, we have found a little over 3,000 individual birds of 120 some species. And you can say, man, 3,000 birds, that's devastating. That's a ton. Or some people might say, hey, 3,000 birds for Atlanta, a top 10 metro area in the country, that's not that bad. We have a small but mighty crew of volunteers. We are looking at an incredibly small footprint of metro Atlanta. And again, the big thing is we're fighting those cleaning crews. If we had more support from building managers, or if we had the capacity to try to gain that support, I think we could get a more accurate number. I think the diversity is definitely indicative of the problem that we know is happening, and the number of just incidental anecdotal reports that I get. So we've collected thousands of birds of 120 some species. We got a new species this past spring, which is always a bit devastating. We got a Connecticut warbler, which, as some of you might know, that's a challenging bird to find alive. So seeing one dead was pretty devastating. Mike shared a link in the chat about a study written by Kyle Horton, who I've mentioned a few times. Kyle Horton is really one of the pioneers on this issue, and it's because of his amazing skills at using those radar systems to quantify and forecast bird migration. He was at Cornell before he became a professor out at Colorado State. And so the paper that Mike is putting in the Q&A is like bright lights and bird cities or something like that. And what they have done is looked at the volume of birds that pass over our metro areas, our larger cities, and also looked at the amount of light, I think from satellite imagery and other things like that, and ranked the cities on how likely a metro area is to impact a bird's migration because of their ambient light at night. And in that paper, it showed that Atlanta was the 9th most dangerous city for birds in the spring and 4th in the fall. And the difference is just the way birds migrate. Many of them do kind of an oval pattern. So we in Atlanta get more birds in the fall than in the spring, proportionally. Of course, we get more in the fall because we also have young birds. So then the question was, have we had observations that actually demonstrate this? And the answer is no, but we have been working with National Audubon the past 6 months or so, and KPMG, which is like a global financial company, and they're doing some pro bono data analysis on some of the sightings that we have found. So I've shared our data with them, and they're looking at historic weather trends and looking at lighting to see if they can tease out some of those relationships. But again, the big problem is still, if we had more buildings doing lights out, and if we had a larger pool of volunteers to collect more data or more consistent data, I think it'd be easier to tease out or to test what was predicted in that paper. So like I can't say for sure, like on these nights of heavier migration or on after a building has turned off its lights, we haven't been able to monitor it well enough to actually say we've seen a direct result. I think that's just because of the lack of enough bodies and enough interest. So it's all coming along, especially from the science standpoint. But more and more cities are doing lights out, more cities are doing ordinances and doing volunteer monitoring. And as we develop more ways to quantify this data, I think we're getting clearer answers. But we know for a fact that lots and lots of birds are dying, and there's lots of evidence that retrofitting with films or other products or building new buildings with bird safe glass, like the new Georgia Audubon office, if you come check it out, maybe for that round robin on September 9th or at a different time, we have glass as a ceramic pattern embedded in the glass, which is shown to be about 90+% effective at reducing collisions. So it's coming together, but we don't have the specificity to answer that question, Mike, with any real data behind it. Any other questions? Again, we really appreciate your time. I recognize many of the names who are here tonight, and some of you are new to the program. Some of you have been long-time supporters off and on. And so we definitely appreciate that effort. And yeah, fall, Lauren mentioned only catching a few birds this spring, and the coast is still a bit unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. We know a lot of birds are migrating to the coast. And even though it lacks the big buildings of Atlanta, we're certain there's still threats down there that we're wanting to learn more. But the fall can be pretty busy. In the spring, the birds are racing back to their breeding grounds. If the conditions are good and they have a good tailwind and low pressure, sometimes they're flying at high altitude and they just kind of skip past cities. So in our spring over the years, our springs are very boom or bust from a collision standpoint. We have some springs that are very active. We get a lot of birds, and some springs we just don't, which the springs you don't, I know that I feel sometimes my effort isn't as like, oh, I put in all this effort. We barely found any birds, barely being relative, but it's good. Less dead birds. So that's always a good thing. But the fall, it's more of a constant trickle of birds. They're not rushing. If the conditions are good, they're finding food, they're going to take their time getting down to Florida or to the neotropics. But we normally find at least double, sometimes triple or quadruple the number of birds in the fall. So again, it's a great time to give this a try, to get out, see what it's all about. And if not, please report any birds you might stumble across or that friends or family might tell you about. Check out dBird and toss in those incidental reports. That's all going to come back to us, and it's helpful for us to grow this program and to pursue things like bird safe building construction and future ordinances. Okay. Well, again, thank you all so much. Hopefully you caught my email and Lauren's email on that slide. If not, we're both on the website, of course, and we will try to include that information in a follow-up with the recording of this in case you want to reference it again. And we can send you all the materials, all the info you need to get you comfortable and set up and feeling ready to go out there and look for birds. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Lauren. And we'll be in touch, and enjoy your fall migration. Have a good evening. Bye, everyone.